So I give a lot of history about how the father of the current Prime Minister, Pierre Trudeau, he was not the Prime Minister at the time, he was the Justice Minister, I think, or the Finance Minister, but the Prime Minister before him was Lester Pearson. And they looked at the math and they said, this is a podunk little country that's never going to punch above its weight. Because like every other developed nation, we're not having enough children. And it is very hard to get people to have children if they're not planning to do so. Hungary, which is really very worried about this right now, they're very worried about immigrants and people wrecking their culture and all this kind of stuff. They are offering that if you have your 5th child, you will never pay income tax again. Nobody's having a 5th child. It's just not working. So Canada says, how do we get people? So they become an active recruitment measure for immigrants. And they know that the #1 destination for immigrants at that time was the United States, as it has been for many, many years, still is, and the UK. So how does Canada get them? So they start looking for activists and freedom fighters and refugees and people like that. And the funny part about this whole thing, Roxanne, you and I haven't talked about, is that I wrote this book and I thought to myself, the Canadians who read this are going to say, this is cute, Velshi, you're writing a book about Canada in the 80s. That's not how things are. So a week ago, we were in Toronto for a fundraiser for the Toronto Public Library system. And the beneficiaries of the fundraiser were newcomers to Canada. How the library can provide newcomers with language instruction, housing guidance, financial services. Canada looks at immigrants and hugs them. It says, you saved us from being this podunk little inefficient country that was never going to punch above its weight. America, I think, truly does believe that and truly knows that, but we have certain things. We start using language about immigrants. It slips into our language. We start using illegals and we start using terminology that dehumanizes people. We house our immigration system in the Department of Homeland Security. I'm not saying there's not a security aspect to borders. I'm saying, why don't you call it the Department of Immigration and maybe house it within the Commerce Department or understand it as an economic imperative that is different from the security imperative. We have painted immigration as a security imperative across America, and yet the statistics show, have always shown, and continue to show to this day that migrants, immigrants, whatever language you want to use, non-native born Americans commit crime at a lower rate than native born Americans. That is a fact. End of story. It's almost always a fact in the world because people who are on some kind of uncertain immigration status have a remarkable disincentive to commit a crime. They're going to get deported. And this is a good place to live. For all its problems, and we can talk about that, for all its problems, America is a great land in which most people will welcome you. But I argue for the idea that we need to think about this entirely differently. We need these people. Stop thinking about it as charity. Don't even think about it as an economic imperative. It's not charity. We're not helping people. We are helping some people, but migration is the way of the world on which this country was built. Canada just understands it differently than America does. And my argument is that America would do well to sit there and say, you remain the #1 destination for immigrants from across the world. Maintain that, because once you lose it, it's very, very hard to get it back.
Explain that to me. What do you mean? Once you lose the number?
Well, because America does have a reputation around the world as being a little bit anti-immigrant, a little bit racist. And that's not... I don't think it's accurate. I don't think it's accurate. But when I see immigrants, and I'm sure I'm like most of you, you can generally sense, if you're talking about undocumented immigrants, you can sense in your city who they probably are, what jobs they do, the things they do. You know when you're looking at somebody and you're interacting with them because they've delivered your food or something like that, you got some sense that you're pretty new here, right? And I look at these people and I think about, I wonder what their grandchildren will write about them. I wonder what their children will be. I wonder whether their children will help us shore up our shortage of doctors or lawyers or pharmacists or whatever it is we're short of because we're short of everything. That's what I think of. I see no threat in the concept of immigration. But immigrants can sense when that happens. When our former president imposed that Muslim ban, who'd you think we were banning? Did you think we were getting a lot of olive grove pickers from Yemen? We were getting PhDs and engineering students who were going to the University of Pennsylvania. Students who are going to our best universities in the world. I remember I was at Davos right after that happened, and the heads of all the universities in the world go to Davos, and they were all telling me, best thing that ever happened to Canada. They hope he keeps this Muslim ban on. Because people who weren't giving Canada a second look all of a sudden were saying, it's not that we don't think this will be settled in the US, but we'd actually like to go to a place where they like us, where they want us, where they value us. And that kind of thing starts to develop around the world. And I'm very happy that people want to go to Canada. It's fantastic. But America still attracts more immigrants than anywhere else in the world. I will say this, immigrants, non-native born people, form a smaller part of the population in America than they do in Canada, New Zealand, and Australia. Important to remember. So while we are the immigrant nation, we're not entirely. And once you start losing, the one advantage you've got is that you are the top spot. America is the top spot for people who want to move somewhere else. Keep that going.